If you like audiobooks or audio shows, check out a free trial of Audible. Just click the link in the description.
You are listening to Mindshock True Crime. This is your host, Bruce McGuire. This is Darlie Routier, Episode 2, Reasonable Doubt. And we will go over even more mind-shocking information and revelations that is not typically covered in mainstream articles. Is there more than meets the eye to the enigmatic Darlie Routier case that has some strange oddities that you don't see in other cases? A very, very perplexing case, which we will, of course, cover in typical Mind Shock fashion with logic and reason at the forefront. If you want to help support the podcast, find it interesting and informative, you can donate to our PayPal. Just check the link in the description. You can also become a YouTube member right here on YouTube for access to exclusive streams and chats. Like and share Twitter, Facebook, Reddit, Patreon. Patrons do get priority for case topic analysis, co-podcast requests. You can also be a guest on the podcast depending on your tier. Make sure to subscribe to the channel. Hit that bell for notifications. If you're still not getting notifications, just comment more. That seems to be the way the YouTube algorithm works. And any kind of questions, rebuttals, or debunkings of any kind, the comment section is open. So let's head over to the Justice for Juveniles WordPress blog, which has some very, very interesting write-ups regarding this case. Obviously, if you haven't checked out episode 1, make sure you check out episode 1. We go over all of the details and then start the deep dive, which we'll continue right now. So this was posted on the Justice for Juveniles WordPress blog, August 21st, 2012. Doubt in the Darlie Routier case, the timeline. As previously discussed, Darlie Routier is on death row in Texas. She has been there for 15 years. She was accused and convicted of murdering her 5-year-old son, Damon. She was charged but never tried in the death of her oldest son, Devon. There is a growing body of evidence suggesting there was a rush to judgment in this case, one that could result in the execution of an innocent woman. That is, unless something is done to stop it. The most important consideration in Darlie Routier's case is the timeline. The prosecution's case against Darlie was circumstantial, resting entirely on the notion that she staged the crime scene in a very short amount of time to mislead investigators. In earlier articles, we looked at the fingerprint evidence in this case, as well as the strange occurrences before, during, and after. And I'll be going over those next. This article will focus on the timeline immediately surrounding the murders. The information provided in this timeline description comes from testimony given by the medical examiner, Janice Townsend Parchman, the first 2 police officers on the scene, and paramedics who responded to the 911 call. The information can be verified through court transcripts. Darlie's testimony was not used to support the timeline. Instead, I used the conversation recorded on the 911 tape to verify Darlie's words and actions, as well as testimony given by others who were present at the time each event occurred. The 911 call is the basis for the timeline since it was recorded and provides a second-by-second description of what was happening in the Routier home for almost 6 minutes. Testimony is used to fill in the gaps and provide information about what happened in the minutes after the 911 call ended. The timeline. June 6th, 1996. Interesting date. I went over that in episode 1. Darren Routier, Darlie's husband, reported he was asleep in the upstairs bedroom when he was suddenly awakened. Darlie was sleeping on the couch in the family room. Devon, 6, and Damon, 5, were sleeping on the floor in the family room in front of the television. Police would later testify that upon arriving at the scene, the television was still on. According to the statement Darren gave to the police, he woke up because he heard a noise and then Darlie screaming loud. He reportedly ran down the stairs and went into the living room. He spotted Devon on the floor and the coffee table tipped over. He went down to Devon and knelt down to investigate whether he was hurt. Darren testified at trial that upon coming down the stairs, Darlie went straight to the phone and to the kitchen sink to get towels. We will now examine the timeline on a minute-by-minute basis. 2:30 a.m. Darlie's call to 911 began with her screaming, "Somebody came in." She went on to tell the dispatcher that she and her children had been stabbed. Based on the transcript of the 911 call, Darren's voice is heard 30 seconds into the call. At the 55-second mark, Darlie asks frantically, "Oh my God, what do we do?" The dispatcher did not respond because she was calling for assistance over the radio. Darren testified that upon discovering Devon with gashes in his chest, he began to perform CPR. Darren explained that Darlie was running back and forth from the kitchen over to Damon, and then she came over to Devon. When asked what she was doing in the kitchen, she answered getting towels. He described her as, quote, trying to stop the bleeding and trying to hold his chest together, end quote, referring to the couple's oldest child, Devon. Officer Waddle was 1.9 miles from the Routier home. Lieutenant Walling, Waddle and Walling, was 3.1 miles from the home. Both received the call regarding the emergency at the Routier home and began driving toward the house. Paramedics were also alerted. This is confirmed through testimony. 2:31 a.m., 1 minute and 7 seconds into the 911 call, Darlie is heard talking to Damon. She says, Damon, hold on, honey. She is again heard speaking to Damon 1 minute and 48 seconds into the call. She said something unintelligible, followed by what sounded like, do you want, honey, hold on. The dispatcher responded by stating she could not understand what Darlie was saying. Darlie replied, I'm talking to my babies. They're dying. Darren can still be heard speaking into the background of the 911 tape. 2:32 a.m., 2 minutes and 20 seconds into the call, Darlie is heard speaking to Damon. She said, hold on, honey, hold on. Darren is also heard in the background of the 911 call during this time frame. 2:33 a.m. In testimony, Darren depicted the arrival of the first officer, David Waddle, on the scene. Darren and Waddle gave slightly different accounts in that Darren implied the officer came to the door, but Waddle testified to seeing Darren in front of the house. Waddle explained the two met in the yard by the fountain and then went into the house. Waddle's arrival is confirmed through the 911 recording. 3 minutes and 45 seconds into the call, a police officer's voice is identified. He is heard saying, look for a rag. Darren testified the officer froze and stopped moving once he entered the home and observed what had happened there. Waddle would later testify that he asked Darlie repeatedly to help her son. He would say that each time he asked, she refused. This is not supported by the 911 call. I mean, see, again, do we have a conspiracy afoot here? Because obviously police, unfortunately, in certain cases, they're more focused on closing the case, not necessarily doing everything by the letter of the law, especially if they truly believe that it's the guilty party that they're skirting around the law to convict. So if they're lying because they think that she really did do it, in their mind, perhaps that's justifiable. Now, what if she really didn't do it? Well, then, of course, that's a problem. But if the police officers are lying here, I mean, this is kind of weird. Moreover, it is important to note that while Darlie was on the phone, she was carrying on conversations with multiple people, sounding as though she were completely panicked. She is heard speaking to Damon, Darren, the police officer, and the dispatcher throughout the entire call. In fact, 3 minutes, 48 seconds into the call, Waddle is heard saying, lay down, okay, just sit down. He had a very short window of time where he could have been asking Darlie, who was herself injured, to tender aid to Damon. However, he is not heard doing this. He is instead heard directing Darlie to sit down. It is unknown exactly why Waddle failed to provide medical aid to Damon upon arriving, as he testified the child was alive, moving, gasping for air, and looking around the room. Additionally, Waddle testified that he did not go into the garage where Darlie informed him a person had fled. His testimony supports Darren's claim that he stood there in the home waiting for backup. This is kind of weird. So the officer did nothing. He just went in and froze and then told Darlie to sit down. If that's true, and again, I'm not alleging it is, this is Mindshock, where the motto is the only thing we know for sure is that we don't know anything for sure. I wasn't there, so I'm not going to hallucinate and pretend to know what did or did not happen. I do not claim anything is true or untrue. However, if an officer did freeze, possibly let a perpetrator get away and let a kid die, then perhaps he would have motivation to not make himself look that bad at trial. Wouldn't be the first time a police officer or someone in a position of perceived authority has done such a thing. to cover for themselves. Not rocket science. It does happen. I'm not saying it happened here, but if that was the case, that could explain the testimony. 2:34 a.m. Within 4 minutes into the 911 call, Darlie begins to sound even more desperate. In the span of a minute, she asked the dispatcher twice about the ambulance and when it would arrive. She pleaded to the dispatcher, "They're barely breathing. If they don't get here, they're gonna be dead." Darren is heard during this time frame saying, they ran. Interesting. 4 minutes and 18 seconds into the call, the dispatcher tells Darlie there is a police officer at the front door. Waddle is already in the home at this time because his voice has been identified on the 911 tape during the later part of the 3rd minute. The police officer at the door was likely Lieutenant Walling because he testified to arriving at the home in around this time frame. If true, it means that Waddle was in the home for approximately 46 seconds before Walling arrived. During that time, Darlie was still on the phone with 911 and was attempting to provide detail to the officer about what happened. Paramedic Jack Colby testified that when he arrived at the home, one officer was already there and another was directly behind him. In testimony, the paramedic identified the officer that came right after him as Walling. Colby explained that the paramedics waited just under 2 minutes before going into the home because they were waiting for the officer to secure the scene. Wow. That's tragic. Would that 2 minutes have made a difference? Maybe, maybe not. And why didn't the first officer, Waddle or Waddell, whatever his name is, he didn't even check the garage to see if there was a threat in the area? I mean, what is going on here? 2:35 a.m. Darren's voice is not heard during the remainder of the call. However, Darlie is heard on the 911 tape saying, "Somebody who did it intentionally walked in here and did it, Darren." This implies that Darren was in the area when she made the statement. Let's dissect the statement, though, because somebody who did it intentionally walked in here and did it, Darren? Wow, what's the context behind that? Does she know that there was some kind of robbery to be staged? I mean, what's the connotation here? As if it wasn't an accident. Somebody who did it obviously it's not an accident, but intentionally wanted to kill them, not just specifically burglarize. What's the context behind this statement here? 5 minutes, 33 seconds into the call, the dispatcher asked if the police officer is there. Darlie says yes. The dispatcher then tells her to go talk to the officer. The dispatcher does not realize that Darlie has been carrying on multiple conversations at the same time throughout the call. 2:36 a.m. Walling entered the backyard to secure it according to his testimony. 2:37 to 2:38 a.m. Within this time frame, the paramedics were given the approval to enter the home. Colby went straight to Damon. He attended to Damon for 2 minutes inside the home before moving him into the ambulance because it was too chaotic in the home. He stated that Damon was still barely alive when he got to him. He testified that Damon gasped for air as he turned him over. When he was with Damon, he observed the light begin to go out of his eyes. Obviously, this is kind of tough to read. I actually don't even want to listen to the call because of this. So I will just be dissecting it based off of this. If there is an error or inaccuracy, anybody, obviously all the listeners can comment about that. Further discussion. It is critical to note that the activities surrounding the 911 call for 2 reasons. First, the prosecution claimed that Darlie murdered her 2 children, cut her neck, cut her arm, tried to clean up in the kitchen, deposited a sock several houses away in an alley, returned to the home to break a glass, and then screamed for help. Second, the prosecution painted Darlie as a cold-blooded killer who was not the least bit concerned with the welfare of her children. The 911 call disproves the latter, but what does it say about the staging? Let's look at one of the medical examiner's testimony. Dr. Janice Townsend Parchman testified at Darlie's trial. One of the topics she provided an expert opinion on was the length of time Damon Routier could have survived his injuries. Dr. Townsend Parchman was skeptical Damon would have lived more than a few minutes upon receiving the stab wounds to his back. And I also mentioned this in episode 1. Did they ever do a recreation with dummies of that size to see if someone of Darlie's stature and strength could have stabbed that hard as to go almost completely through the body, as the stab wounds were reportedly to have been basically completely through the body, just about. So does a woman of her small stature at the time, did she have was she physically capable of doing what was done? I don't know the answer to that question. I don't know if this has been replicated. Prosecutor Greg Davis asked Dr. Townsend Parchment to give an estimate of the amount of time she believed Damon could have survived his injuries. She responded, minutes. She stated that if all 4 wounds were inflicted at the same time or within a very short period of time, he would have died within minutes. She testified that she could not tell exactly how long he would have lived, estimating on several occasions it would be just minutes. Defense attorney Mulder asked if it would be less than 5 minutes. She responded, likely. She went on to add that from the time he collapsed until the time he actually expired would probably be another few minutes. Mulder attempted to ask the doctor to give an exact time frame, asking her if there could be as much as 8 or 9 minutes. She testified, you can't tell. On redirect, Davis touched on the length of time Damon could have survived once again. Can you give us an estimate of how long this child might have lived if, say, stab wound 1 had been inflicted and then the other 3 were inflicted sometime later on? She responded, what we're talking about, a few to several more minutes. From the time Darlie began the 911 call, so what's the theory here? She did 1 or 2 stabs, ran out to plant the sock, then came back and then finished the stabbing? Is that what the prosecution is going to shift to alleging? From the time Darlie began the 911 call to the time the paramedics stated Damon took his last breath, about 8 minutes had passed. Remember, Darlie was not on the phone with 911 until after Darren came down the stairs and attended to Devon. It is important to factor the length of time it would have taken for Darren to wake up upon hearing a noise and appear in the family room when estimating how much time Darlie had to stage a crime scene. According to Janice Townsend Parchment, Darlie had approximately 0 to 60 seconds to stage the scene and injure herself. If the maximum amount of time Damon was likely to live is 9 minutes, the amount of time spent on the 911 call must be subtracted. Additionally, the nearly 2 minutes it took for the paramedics to enter the Routier home must be subtracted. Finally, the paramedic testified that Damon was still alive during the 2-minute period he provided to aid the child inside the home. The paramedics arrived on the scene 5 minutes after the call to 911 was made. They waited almost 2 minutes for the scene to be secured. Damon was still alive during the 2-minute time frame the paramedic attended to him. This adds up between 8 or 9 minutes, depending on the exact moment Damon died in the paramedic's care. Okay, so is there another theory here where would Darren have had to have been involved in order for the timeline to work if we're saying Darlie committed this act or was involved in the committing of the act, possibly with Darren? Because then maybe they have the extra time to stage if one of them is also running to plant the sock. But that's not what the prosecution alleged, is it? Back to the article here. Now you have to ask yourself, did Darlie really have time to do everything the prosecution claimed she did before she made that call to 911? As previously mentioned, a sock with Devon and Damon's blood was found several houses away, and I also postulated this on episode 1. If they planted the sock, let's say the day before, theoretically that could work also, because there was a very, very small amount of blood. It could have been from anything. It was on the ground near a trash can. There was no blood trail near the sock. If Darlie placed it there as the prosecution contended, she had to have done it after the boys were fatally injured and before she slashed her own neck. Not necessarily, unless it was the day before, possibly. She would have had to have done it in bare feet, or else she would have to take even more time upon arriving back at home to remove her shoes. If barefoot, she would have taken even longer to deposit the sock, which was, of course, almost a whole football field away. Already, we are looking at about a minute of time, but we still have not factored in Darlie's injuries. How much time would it have taken to injure herself? To break the glass to make it appear as though it had been knocked out of the wine rack by an intruder? Why not wait until she is absolutely certain both boys are dead before screaming to get Darren's attention? Damon was alive when police arrived and when the paramedics attended to him. If she stabbed her children, why did she leave an obviously surviving witness? The fact is, Darlie did not have the amount of time to do everything the prosecution said she did. It simply doesn't make sense. One only needs to look at the 911 call and various testimony to figure that out. Unfortunately, it takes a lot of painstaking work to break the timeline down as I have above. Had the jury been able to do that, I have to seriously doubt they would have been able to convict Darlie. Yeah, I mean, these are very, very good points in the timeline. As in every case, the timeline is critical. Because if we don't know what happened when, I mean, everything kind of goes out the window in terms of beyond a reasonable doubt. Because is this beyond a reasonable doubt, or is there a reasonable doubt? This is clearly enough for some kind of doubt. That doesn't mean Darlie's innocent. That doesn't mean she may not have done this with Darren's help. Because if her and Darren both did it, then the timeline could work. Again, that's not why I'm alleging. This is Mindshock. I'm not alleging anything is true or untrue. But if you're going to say she's guilty, it seems that it could not have played out the way the prosecution stated, in which case it is still a wrongful conviction, even if she's guilty. And that's without even getting into all of these other oddities, which produce even more doubt. So let's look at the fingerprints here. Also from Justice for Juveniles, August 17, 2012, doubt in the Darlie Routier case, the fingerprints. I said in a previous blog that I would write about the Darlie Routier case again. The truth is I could write an entire book on this particular case and still not cover everything. Indeed, several people have already written books on the case, and I feel comfortable saying there is still more to this complex story than most people realize. There are many who believe that the state of Texas got it right when they prosecuted Darlie for the death of one of her 2 young boys, Damon. You know what else is weird? Is the reason they didn't prosecute her for the other boy simply because they thought Darren was also involved, but they couldn't prove it for whatever reason? And they just wanted to go after her instead of Darren? I mean, I don't know. Again, here, just speculating. In the first episode, I originally speculated that they wanted a second shot at convicting her, which is why they only tried her for 1. But, however, the evidence has slowly emerged over the years that cast doubt on the theory presented by the prosecution at trial. Assistant DA Greg Davis was adamant that the crime scene inside the Routier home was staged, and that the sole person responsible for the murders of Devon and Damon was none other than their own mother. Many people believe this theory when it was presented. They believed it in spite of the injuries Darlie sustained. Though a number of people testified that Darlie's injuries were superficial, doctors who treated her at Baylor University Medical Center stated under oath that during exploratory surgery of her neck wound, it was determined that the knife had sliced within 2 millimeters of her carotid artery. Had the artery been severed, Darlie would have died without immediate treatment within minutes. So actually, you know what? Someone actually commented, I don't remember who it was. I don't know if it was either in the chat on the live or it was in the comment section during episode 1. So I postulated that she, theoretically, if she's guilty, she could have attempted to commit suicide and failed. But it's difficult to believe she would have intentionally sliced near her carotid artery, obviously, if she was looking to survive and just stage this attack. Someone commented, if she's really, really dumb, does she not know what the carotid artery is? And was she just slicing her neck just to make it look like an attack and did not intend to kill herself? I hadn't gone over that in episode 1, so that's an interesting theory as well. Is it possible she was that dumb she would carelessly slice next to her carotid artery not knowing what it was? Again, this is Mindshock. We got to go down every single rabbit hole. Obviously, it doesn't explain all these other things, but I did want to touch upon that because, again, we are comprehensive here. Continuing on here, there is evidence to suggest someone outside of the Routier family entered it during the early morning hours of June 6, 1996, before police responded to Darlie's 911 call. I'll begin with a discussion of the fingerprint evidence. A single bloody fingerprint, sometimes referred to as a fingerprint or a partial palm print, though it looks like a fingerprint, was left on the glass table in the Routier's family room the morning of the murders. At trial, Dallas police officer James Cron testified that there was not enough detail to make an identification. He suggested the print was left by one of the 2 young boys. The investigators working on the case failed to obtain the fingerprints of Devon and Damon to use for comparison purposes. What? Why? Additionally, neither of the 2 medical examiners who conducted autopsies on the boys took their prints. In an attempt to put an end to speculation that the bloody fingerprint from the glass table belonged to one of the boys, the children were exhumed. Measurements of the children's fingers were taken. The children were buried together holding hands. This, combined with the passage of time and conditions within the coffin, compromised the ability to collect the boys' prints. However, some fingerprints were obtained along with the measurements. Richard Jantz conducted an analysis of the print taken from the glass table. Jantz obtained his PhD in anthropology from the University of Kansas. In 2002, Jantz signed an affidavit pertaining to his examination of the bloody print that had become known as Exhibit 85J. He explained in the report that the purpose of the examination was to address the question of whether the fingerprint was made by an adult or child. For the examination, Jantz compared the dimension of the fingerprints from a collection of dermatoglyphic prints for adults and children. Children's prints made between the ages of 4 and 6.6 years were analyzed for the study. Jantz also had the fingerprint cards for the Routier children for consideration. The fingerprint was made in blood, consisted of a whorl pattern. Jantz determined that Devon had a whorl pattern on one of his right fingers. Damon had a whorl pattern on his right thumb. When Jantz compared the dimensions of the latent fingerprint against Damon's thumb and Devon's finger, he determined that the value from the core to flexion crease was almost 2 millimeters less than the fingerprint obtained from the Routier home for Devon, and over 3 millimeters less for Damon. To break this down in simpler terms, Jantz provided a chart that contained the average measurements for individuals falling within specific classifications. Again, these were based on the collection of fingerprints I referred to above. The males in the sample had an average measurement of 14.285 from core to flexion crease. Females had an average of 12.306. Children between the ages of 4 and 6.6 years had an average of 9.21. The bloody fingerprint measured 12.6. So Darlie Routier is clearly an average to below average female in size and stature. She's not a large female. And this print is measuring larger than average. Now, I'm assuming they measured Darlie's. I mean, let's see what else is here. Because some people think that the fingerprint is Darlie's. And there's obviously a lot of speculation about that. But the fingerprint is measuring 12.6, so larger than an average female. Based on the data provided by Jantz, the latent print was not consistent with a young child. It appeared to be the most consistent with an adult female. However, it is important to note that a variation in measurements exists. Standard deviation for the male measurements was 1.881. Well, what's the standard for the female, though? Because if the standard is about 1, then that, yes, could still fall within that deviation. Jantz also looked at the ridge breadth, which represents ridges that run transversely across the finger between the pattern and the flexion crease. Jantz also wrote, it is obvious that the latent print has coarser ridges than either Damon's thumb or Devon's digit. Those two digits were compared since they were the only ones containing whorl patterns. The average measurement in centimeters for adult males was 18.446, with a standard deviation of 2.231. For women, the measurement was an average 20.386 with a standard deviation of 2.085. Finally, the children average measurement was 27.322 with a standard deviation of 3.077. The latent print measured 20.6. So it is a female? Jantz concluded by saying the foregoing analysis is able to successfully identify the prints of the two known children, the thumb of Damon Routier, the digit from Devon Routier as those of children. The latent print consistently has a higher probability of having been made by an adult. The probabilities range from 0.767 to 0.985, depending upon which character is used. Though Jantz report supports the defense's contention that the print did not belong to either of the Routier children, it is not sufficient on its own to exclude Darlie Routier as the source of the print. The logical progression of thinking on the part of the state and those convinced of Darlie's guilt was that the print belonged to Darlie. So they changed the story. So it's no longer the boys, now it's Darlie. In 2003, Robert Loan signed an affidavit wherein he described comparing Darlie Routier's fingerprints to the Latin bloody print obtained from the glass table. Previously, Lons worked as a latent print examiner from 79 to 96. He worked in conjunction with the New York City Major Case Squad and the Federal Bureau of Investigation Joint Bank Robbery Task Force. He taught homicide investigation courses and conducted training seminars on detection and recovery methods for latent prints. Lons compared the latent print to a print card containing Darlie's fingerprints. After conducting analysis of the prints, Lons concluded that, quote, number 85J was not made by the person from whom the fingerprints on Exhibit B were taken, end quote. Exhibit B consisted of Darlie Routier's fingerprints. Lons was not contacted by the state or Darlie's defense to make the comparison either. He was contacted by ABC News. Okay, that's kind of weird. So did Darlie's defense, were they afraid that it really was her print? So they didn't want to take the chance of finding out and they just leave it ambiguous? And obviously the prosecution didn't. I mean, why didn't they want to do it? Because they already had Darlie pegged. So ABC News, a somewhat neutral party in this whole saga, since they aren't technically on the side of the prosecution or the defense in this particular case, or at least not yet, possibly. I mean, again, depending on how you view the showing of the cemetery tape, whatever. So they contacted this lead expert, this FBI experienced guy, this guy who taught homicide investigation courses with decades of experience as a latent print examiner. So he unequivocally concluded, quote, number 85J was not made by the person from whom the fingerprints on Exhibit B were taken, end quote. And Exhibit B is Darlie Routier's fingerprints, and you can verify this in the court documents. So, okay. The prosecution responded by submitting the affidavit of Pat Wertheim, who concluded that all of Darlie's fingerprints were excluded except the ring finger of her right hand. Wertheim claimed that the finger could not be matched to the latent print nor excluded. One of the attorneys, Stephen Cooper, handling Darlie's appeals, told the media no less than 3 other fingerprint experts have concluded Darlie as a possible source. Whoa, that is so disingenuous. Possible? I mean, theoretically, anything's possible, but if it doesn't match, so that's kind of weird. Cooper stated that Jantz was not included in the 3 experts who concluded the convicted woman as a source of the print, of course. So the most expert guy, his opinion was not included. Darlie's attorneys also claimed in her writ of habeas corpus that the above-described fingerprint has been compared to law enforcement personnel who responded to the scene. The state changed their story to fit the crime and to fit evolving explanation of evidence based on advancements in expertise and science. The prosecution originally suggested the fingerprint was left by a child. When this claim was challenged, the prosecution altered their story by claiming Darlie was the contributor of the print. It appears the state has been unable to obtain a statement that definitively identifies Darlie as a source of print. The best they have is to offer is the contention that a single finger on Darlie's right hand cannot be excluded or identified as the contributor. But what does that even mean? Does that finding have any value in light of other experts finding the print does not match Darlie? In terms of fingerprint evidence, there appears to be more. In 2003, Darlie's attorneys filed a renewed motion for the testing of physical and biological evidence, combined with a request for an evidentiary hearing. 2 fingerprints were taken from the utility room door leading to the garage of the Routier home. One print was made in blood and the other was not. The fingerprint below the bloody print was examined by Lons and identified as matching the middle finger of Darren's left hand. However, the motion states that 2 experts, Lons and a forensic fingerprint analyst named Glenn Langenberg, examined the same print to determine if Darlie could be identified or excluded as the source of the print. Both experts excluded her. The experts did not agree as to whether or not Darren was the source of the print. However, Langenberg's assessment differed from Lon's in that it excluded Darren as the contributor. In 2008, the federal court granted Darlie's request to test evidence in part. Regarding the fingerprint evidence, the motion stated the following, quote, the bloody fingerprint deserves to be examined with the most modern techniques available. The same is true for the fingerprints marked as state exhibit numbers 85-F and 85-G. The bloody print refers to the first piece of evidence discussed above, which consisted of a fingerprint located on the glass table. However, this has been put on hold until Texas is finished with other approved testing. In another motion filed in 2008, Darlie's defense asked that the court grant the request to run the fingerprint evidence through all available fingerprint databases. The defense added, as with DNA testing, any identification of this print as belonging to a male outside of the Routier family will provide powerful corroboration of Miss Routier's account. Indeed, it would. It would destroy the prosecution's theory that there was not an intruder, as Darlie claimed. If any of the prints are run through a fingerprint database and match someone outside the Routier home who was in the area at the time, it would mean that an intruder did enter the family home. If there is a match to either of the bloody fingerprints to someone outside the immediate family, it means that they were present during the attacks because the prints were made in blood. I mean, is that really true, though? Like, what, did the paramedic not touch the table? Is it possible the paramedic, or one of the paramedics? No, but they tested their prints, too, and it didn't match. Okay. I placed a photograph of the print made in blood left on the glass table on Exhibit B, the fingerprint card used to compare Darlie Routier's prints to those found in the home. Click on the picture to see the larger version. In addition to possibly matching one or more prints to someone outside the Routier home, there is also the chance that DNA test may be successful in extrapolating DNA belonging to a non-family member. DNA tests are, I mean, that's a good point, too. So it's not just about the print, because if they get the DNA, if they get the blood and it's not anybody else's blood, who does the blood belong to? So they did not match the blood to anybody? So they're saying it's Darlie's print, but not Darlie's blood? Like, what's going on here with this print? DNA tests are currently far more sophisticated than they were in 96 and 97, when the crimes originally occurred and when Darlie was tried in the death of Damon. DNA testing and retesting was approved for a number of items. In April 2012, the court ordered the materials to be delivered to the Department of Public Safety Laboratory no later than the 23rd of May. The court ordered that the testing take place in a timely and efficient manner. It is now mid-August 2012. Some may deny there is any doubt at all in this case, but I feel that people who take the time to review all the available evidence will find it difficult to conclude that there is not reasonable doubt. Others who read through the evidence, particularly those who have witnessed the aftermath of wrongful convictions, some of which have been corrected, are likely to come to the realization that justice was not served in this case. 2 little boys died horrific deaths, and their mother is on death row for the crime. Texas has executed people in situations where there was considerable doubt about their actual guilt. Johnny Garrett is merely one example. Texas has even gone to great lengths to keep the truth from surfacing. In Garrett's case, the state threatened to take legal action against the family if they pursued DNA testing to prove his innocence after his execution had already taken place. That particular case is chronicled in a documentary called The Last Word. Though low budget, the film is a cautionary tale about the rush to justice that occurs in some situations, resulting in the delay or denial of justice. There is much more evidence and information worth examining in this case. I have decided that the best thing to do is to break this down into smaller descriptions over time. The most salient question that remains in this case is this: should any state carry out an execution where there is serious doubt as to whether or not the person committed the crime? More importantly, now that you know there is doubt, are you comfortably standing by and merely hoping that the wheels of justice eventually move in the right direction? I'm not. I hope there are many more who feel as I do. Okay. Yeah, I mean, a lot of issues there. One final post. Actually, there's a couple more posts here. Doubt in the Darlie Routier case, strange occurrences. So let's get into Mindshock land. August 18th, 2012. It has been said that the prosecution's case against the Texas mother of 3, Darlie Lynn Routier, was circumstantial. Darlie is now on death row as a result of her 97 conviction in connection with the death of her youngest son, Damon. I previously wrote about the fingerprint evidence in Darlie's case, but I wanted to switch gears a little and discuss some of the strange occurrences surrounding the murders of the Routier children. Uncovering the truth about what happened during the early morning hours of June 6, 96 requires one to look at reported occurrences and sightings before, during, and after the crimes took place. Examination of this type of case must extend outside of the family home and reflect an overall picture of the neighborhood as well. Below is a synopsis of some of the events and sightings that reportedly took place. The attempted break-in. On June 11th of 96, Mary Angela Rickles, known as Angel Leah Rickles, known as Angel, contacted the Rowlett Police Department to inform them that during the early morning hours of June 6th, an unidentified man attempted to enter her home. The defense called Rickles to testify at Darlie's trial. She explained that she had been home with her 15-year-old daughter when the incident happened. She was married and also had 2 other children who were staying with their grandmother at the time. Her husband worked the night shift, leaving the house at 9:30 p.m. and returning the following morning at 9:30 or 10 a.m. Rickles testified that she was watching television at 1:30 a.m. when a series of strange occurrences took place. At first, she heard sounds as though someone were trying to get in the house through a door. Initially, she believed it was her husband who would come home from work periodically to check on her. She had suffered a stroke, a number of heart attacks, and had also recently lost her brother. However, she became suspicious when she heard the sound of wood splitting and a loud cracking noise. This prompted her to turn on her porch light to see what was happening. In her testimony, she described seeing 2 men standing outside through a peephole in the door. One was stockier than the other, wearing a knit cap. He had blonde hair sticking out from under the cap. She said he was wearing a dark jogging suit. The other individual was tall and thin. The men ran from the house and headed in the direction of Willowbrook Drive. Willowbrook eventually leads to Eagle Drive, where the Routiers lived. Wait, what is going on here? So there's some kind of a noise. She looks through the peephole. There's 2 guys standing around. Then they just randomly ran from the house. So they tried to get in, couldn't get in. She saw them through the peephole and then they run away. That's kind of weird. Okay. Once the men left, Rickles described feeling as though the incident had passed, but she was still frightened. Rickles explained during her testimony that she proceeded to calm her 15-year-old daughter, who had also witnessed the events and was scared. They resumed watching television and a short time later heard what sounded like tapping coming from the bedroom window located near the front of the house. Now, this is really creepy. Rickles peered through the blinds and saw that the two men had returned. This time she saw they had a metal object that looked like either a screwdriver or a knife. She turned off the bedroom light and the men left. They did not return again that evening. What is going on here? So as soon as the light gets turned off, they leave? That's kind of weird. Wouldn't that embolden them because they think they're going to sleep? Though shaken by the incident, Rickles testified that she did not call the police that night to report the incident. She stayed awake the rest of the night. Later on that morning, she told her husband she would go on to relay the story to other family members. Rickles did not call the police until the 11th. She explained that once the incidents took place, she did not see a point in calling them. She said the following during trial, "Well, at the time I was thinking it's all over. What can they do now, you know?" Wow, sounds like a smart lady. How often do police actually catch burglars, let alone burglars who were simply attempting a burglary and not actually following through on it? And also keep in mind, I mean, supposedly this is a woman who had suffered multiple heart attacks and a stroke. So just keep that in mind. And she's still sharp enough to understand the percentage of clearance on police cases. She also reported seeing a dark vehicle parked outside. She did not recognize the vehicle, but it appeared to remain in the same spot throughout the night. She did not describe seeing anyone getting into or out of the vehicle that night, just that the car was present during the same time frame. A telephone memorandum taken by the Rowlett police stated the vehicle in question belonged to someone living on Miami Drive. Okay, so maybe not connected to these guys. You would think if they were these two guys, they wouldn't have left their car parked there, left, and then come. I mean, who knows? But the bizarre incidents did not stop with the attempted break-in, however. In August, Rickles saw what appeared to be the same vehicle as the one she saw the morning of June 6th. She stated, "Well, again in August, I saw that car pull out there, and what triggered my memory was that the person that got out of the car was the same build as the stocky guy that I had seen before, and so I ran in and called the police." The police came to the home, and Rickles described them coming to the home. She pointed out to them and bringing out a small, skinny person in handcuffs. She said the person they removed from the home was shorter than the one she saw on June 6th. Wait a second. She pointed out to them? What? So the police actually arrested some guy just because she pointed him out? A small, skinny person? There seems to be more to this story here. Are the police really going to just arrest a guy? She said that this guy is shorter than the guy. So she saw the stocky guy is the one she identified. So she called the police. The police came and arrested some guy that is not the stocky guy that she pointed out. What is going on here? In November, Rickles stated that she had gone out to her garage to smoke a cigarette at about 2:30 to 3 a.m. The garage door was open about a foot. She heard what sounded like shuffling footsteps in the driveway. She then testified to the following, quote, "I was just scared, and so I just pulled the door down and stuck a stick in the door so they couldn't lift it." She called the police again later on that morning. Wait, what happened? Wait, what happened? Where's the rest of this story? She locked the person in the drive. Wait, what? Oh, wait a second. Shuffling. So they already went. Did they already run away? And she stuck stuck a stick in the door so that they couldn't lift it from the outside ever again. So it's not that she locked them in there. No further information was given during the testimony about the attempted break-in, the car sighting, or even the police removing an individual in handcuffs from a nearby home. All of this just disappeared. Like, why can I not find any actual information about this? Because if this is other criminals not related to the Routier case, I mean, you would think that having some information, oh yeah, this guy was arrested in connection with this other case, here's all the information, but it just randomly completely disappeared. That's kind of weird. The report of the break-in coincides with the time frame in which Darlie Routier claimed an unknown person entered her home. So coincidentally, the night of the murders is the only other time there was an attempted burglary reported in the neighborhood. Is that true? I mean, we'll see here. Let's see what else is reported here. Rickles described the first incident occurring at 1:30 a.m. The men left the area and returned at approximately 2 a.m. It was after... what is going on here? These two guys try to get in. They can't get in. They leave. A half hour later, they return with either a screwdriver or a knife. But as soon as she turns off the light in her bedroom, they leave again. What? The men left the area and returned at approximately 2 a.m. It was after 2 a.m. that Rickles described seeing the vehicle. So the vehicle was, she did not notice the vehicle the first time the men came. So is it possible the vehicle's not associated with the men? Or maybe not, because on a different day, she saw what looked to be the stockier man exit the vehicle. These times are estimates, but they occurred before Darlie made a 911 call reporting the stabbing of her two children and the attack on herself. That call took place at 2:30 a.m. This is a really weird timeline. So is it mere coincidence that at 1:30 and 2 a.m. there are these two guys trying to get into a home, and then Darlie calls at 2:30 a.m.? It is important to point out that the Rickles family home was about a half a mile from the Routier home. It would take approximately 9 minutes to walk from the home on Miami Drive to where the Routier family lived on Eagle Drive. In Rowlett, Texas, it would take far less time to drive. The police noted on the telephone memorandum that the vehicle was a 1989 Ford two-door. The make of the car was not given, even though the police provided other details such as a license plate number. So they do have a plate number. Very, very interesting. Reported vehicle and people sightings. In the time leading up to the crimes, a number of unusual sightings were reported. June 6th, Sally Bingham reported to police that she was a neighbor of the Routier family. She described being awake at 1 to 1:30 a.m. the morning the murders took place. Bingham stated that she kept seeing car lights driving through the neighborhood. Her bedroom had a bay window. The vehicle made several trips down the street before Bingham finally got up and looked outside to see a white vehicle. The only other description of the vehicle was celebrity type. All right, so what does that mean? So are we to presume this is not a normal occurrence, that this celebrity type white vehicle is just randomly driving through the neighborhood back and forth between 1 and 1:30 a.m.? Is that the only time she ever remembers that happening? I mean, we don't have that information here, but June 7th, Betty Jung reported that her son saw a suspicious-looking man in the morning wearing jeans, a white shirt, and a black cap. He was also carrying a knapsack. A note on the memo states, quote, probably the same person Officer Caylett questioned on 66 at Barrett's, end quote. The sighting took place at the Rowlett Vet Clinic, located 3 miles west of the Routier home. An additional lead sheet described a man fitting the same description carrying a backpack near I-30 and Dal Rock. The tip was dated June 6, 1996, 4 p.m. It described the sighting as taking place at 5 a.m. I-30 was located south of the Routier home, about 2.5 miles away. Was the person observed in these two separate sightings the same individual? Who did Caylett question? And apparently there's no further information on this, which is a little bit curious. Also, on June 7th, Jonathan Hartley called police to report that the Dallas Morning News mail carrier had threatened him. He also stated the man's name was Ray Clemens and suggested the police look into him. Hartley lived on Eagle Drive, approximately 285 feet from the Routier home. Okay, has this ever happened in a murder case before? The following day, somebody reports the mail carrier as threatening them the day after a murder occurred, right in the immediate vicinity, within a few hundred feet. Corey Keith lived in the neighborhood and contacted police on June 7th to report an incident that occurred during the week before the murders. He described returning home at 2:30 to 3 a.m. I mean, this is a neighborhood with a lot of late night, early morning activity here. And seeing an older style minivan driving slowly down Eagle Drive. He described the occupants of the van as, quote, shining lights on houses, end quote. The van left the area as Keith approached. He tried to turn around to get a better look at the van, but was unable to locate it once he did. The only other description of the van was that it was possibly light tan in color. The driver appeared to be a white male in his 20s. No description was given for the passenger. Julie Clark was another person who contacted the police the day after the murders. She described herself as a close friend of the Routiers, and when she testified at Darlie's trial, she indicated that on the day of the murders, a woman who cleaned Darlie's house saw a black vehicle. So we have multiple different sightings here of a black vehicle, one sighting of a white vehicle, and one sighting of a van. The sighting of the black car was reported by the woman's daughter, Barbara Jovel, as well. Jovel's mother reportedly saw a black two-door sports car driving slowly down the alley located behind the Routier home. So not just in the neighborhood, but directly in the alley where the sock was found. The vehicle stopped in the alley and was described as having a dark complexion. When Jovel's mom went into the garage, the vehicle was driven away. Barbara also reported seeing a vehicle matching the same description. On June 5th, Barbara had gone to pick up her mother from Darlie's home. As the two were leaving, they saw a black sports car pass them. Barbara's mom said it was the same vehicle she saw the day before. Barbara added to the description by stating the car had bad paint and a short trunk area. So this wasn't a particularly well-maintained vehicle. On June 8th, John Reed contacted police to report that the day of the murders he was in the front yard cleaning up. His two grandchildren were there with him, and they saw a white male sitting in a faded blue older model four-door car. He described the man as suspicious. The distance from the address indicated on the telephone memo and the Routier home is 0.4 miles. No further information is provided on the telephone lead sheet. However, the words duplication of one Keith had is written across the bottom. At the top of the page, it says same and then shows number 0021 over the number 0007. Wait, what? Does that mean other people also had this sighting of this vehicle? A separate lead sheet with the same date gave a little bit more information. The tip describes the man seeing a car parked down the street. The driver appeared to be watching the man's grandchildren. So this is June 8th. So but this incident occurred the day of the murder. So it was reported June 8th. But this was the day of the murders. There's a creepy guys looking at children. What does everybody make of this? Because supposedly this is not a normal occurrence, at least not in this neighborhood. Otherwise, there'd be way more reports, right? The lead sheet says that when the man who reported this got into the vehicle to drive down to the suspicious-looking car, the man pulled away and left. So apparently, I guess this man is not a known neighbor. The address matched the one above, but the last name was recorded as something other than Reed. Additionally, under the street address at Highgate Lane, the officer wrote Dallas, Texas. The street address exists in both Dallas and Rowlett. If the police obtained information of the correct city, it is not indicated. The address in Dallas is almost 20 miles from the Routier home. So they can't even clarify this? What is going on here? And is this all confusion and obfuscation by design? That's the question here. On June 9th, Bill Nuth contacted police and gave them information about seeing a vehicle cruising the neighborhood the evening of the murders. Knuth said the driver was a young white male who was acting suspiciously. The car apparently stopped near the Routier's corner house around 7 to 8 p.m. He was unable to get a plate number, saying only that the vehicle observed was either a Geostorm or a Dodge Neon. The vehicle had two doors, a hatchback, and was either blue or purple. Man, this is a lot of suspicious cars being reported. On June 17th, Officer Needham described a report police received of a black Nissan with an identified Texas plate that was observed in the area of the Routier home. Officer Needham and Detective Latham also saw this vehicle. Wow, so the cops saw it? The lead sheet reads, quote, owner had been sitting in the area after the murders, sightseeing, end quote. No further information was given about the owner of the car or whether police established the individual had an alibi the night of the murders. Wait, what? So described a police report observed in the area of the Routier home. So what's the date here, though? So the report was made on the June 17th. Huh. So they said he was sightseeing. Yeah, it would be curious to know if this vehicle matched the previous vehicle sighted before the murders. Perhaps one of the stranger vehicle sightings was reported by Bob Salzy. He first called into the police department on June 8th. He was a delivery person for the Daily Business News and delivered the paper across the street from the Routier home at 12:30 a.m. the night of the murders. In the first description, it says, did not see anything suspicious. The following day, Detective Needham spoke to Salzy. He reiterated that he was in the area the evening of the murders, 12 to 12:30 a.m. However, this time he said he saw a white car in the driveway of the Routier home. It was described as suburban type. Okay, so now there's two white cars reported, several different or possibly the same black cars and a possible tan van and a possible purple or blue vehicle. Although if it's reflecting something at night, is it possible they mistook the blue or purple for black? The Routiers had two vehicles in June of 96. The first was a dark green Nissan Pathfinder. The second was an older Jaguar, but the Jaguar was in the shop at the time of the murders, so it was not present. Okay, very interesting. It appears the police may have dismissed the sightings because the note says that Salzy was colorblind. The problem is that a person who is colorblind is unlikely to mistake a dark green vehicle for a white one. There are different forms of colorblindness. A person who has it may have difficulty identifying red, green, or both. However, people who are colorblind can see different shades in that their inability to distinguish a color does not mean it would appear blank or white. Another problem with dismissing the sighting of a vehicle in the driveway that night is that the Pathfinder was not parked in the driveway of the Routier home. Okay, wow, this is damning then. Various testimony throughout Darlie's trial revealed that the Pathfinder was routinely parked out in front of the house, not in the driveway. A neighbor named William Gorsuch testified that he saw the vehicle parked in front of the home the morning of the murders. Darren also testified he parked the Pathfinder in front of the home. Why don't they park in the driveway, though? Is that they just don't want to? So we have evidence, multiple neighbors all say they don't park in the driveway. Whose car was parked in the driveway that evening if it was not the Routiers? Okay, this is weird. So we have a mysterious black vehicle cited by multiple people, and then also two people citing this mysterious white vehicle also possibly parked in the driveway. This is crazy. This is truly mind-shocking. Why is nobody talking about this? In 2002, Darlene Potter gave an affidavit describing an unusual sighting during the early morning hours of June 6th. Potter was returning to her residence after visiting her daughter in Cleburne, Texas. Sometime after 2 a.m., she reported that she had reached Dal Rock Road, north of Highway 66. Wow, this is crazy. June 6th, 96, next to Highway 66? This is a little too weird for some people. And also, the Routier home is right next to the cemetery as well. The cemetery is very, very close behind it. As she approached the curve, she slowed down considerably because she was pulling a trailer behind her van. She stated the following, quote, I suddenly saw a man walking on the edge of the left side of the roadway headed in the same direction I was going. He was about 6 feet tall, medium build, had shoulder-length brownish hair which was messed up, wearing a black t-shirt. He was barefooted, end quote. Potter then observed a second man walking on the left edge of the road as well. She described the second man as wearing a light-colored baseball cap, a white shirt, and blue jeans. She said he was tall and stocky, standing at about 5'8". In reference to the second man, Potter added, quote, as I approached this man, he stepped from the side of the road as if he were walking toward my vehicle. I was just starting to accelerate slowly from out of the curve at this time, and when I saw the man stepping towards my car, he looked in the direction of the first man. I then looked in my mirror again and saw the first man shaking his head as if to say no to the second man. How creepy is this? I mean, this is not that far from the Routier home. I actually didn't even see this before. This is insane. On the map, there's a triangle here. Basically forming Lakeview Parkway is Route 66. Highway 66. This is June 6th, 1996. And in between the Routier home and Highway 66 is a cemetery. What does everybody make of this? And it's a little weird, even for Mindshock, even for me. This is quite a big stack of sixes here. Very, very creepy stuff here. I don't know what to make of this. This is just so weird. 66 is right there. Highway 66, June 6th, 1996. This is just weird, and right next to a cemetery. Okay, so what were these men doing? And do these men match the description of the other person who said that they were trying to break into her house? The sighting stood out in her mind, and why is all this weird stuff going on the night of the murders? So all of this is going on June 6th. I mean, this is just weird. In reference to the second man in the wee hours of the morning. I mean, this is crazy. The sighting stood out in her mind because one of the men was barefooted and also because it occurred so early in the morning. It made her uneasy because she lived in the area. She returned home and tried to sleep. About 45 minutes later, she said she observed a small dark-colored car driving through the field next door to her home. She said it appeared as if it were riding its brakes. No address is given for Potter, so it is difficult to determine which field she was referring to or how far she lived from the Routier home. But she clearly gave the intersection for the sighting. And again, is this all by design? Like, none of her info is listed? Like, they don't want anybody to follow up from her? The sighting of the two men on foot happened approximately 0.6 miles from the Routier residence. Concluding remarks. The above descriptions pose more questions than they answer. These strange occurrences suggest that there was more going on in the neighborhood at the time of the murders than the police and the prosecutors were willing to acknowledge. Some of this information was presented in court, some was not. For example, there's discussion in the trial transcripts of the police receiving information that a dark-colored vehicle was observed in the area. As previously disclosed, the defense also called Rickles to the stand to reiterate what she told police and others about an attempted break-in during the early morning hours of June 6th. However, it is difficult to find all the information pertaining to the people and events observed in the time frame surrounding the murders. For instance, police confirmed that canvassing was done in the neighborhood. This is where officers go door to door to ask if anyone heard, saw, or experienced anything unusual before, during, or after the murders that might be connected. I have been unable to locate these notes, but if they exist, they are likely stored with the other police files relating to this case. There is much more to cover that creates doubt about the prosecution's case against Darlie Routier. The more information revealed, the more apparent it becomes that an overzealous prosecution of a young mother may have resulted in a wrongful conviction. I mean, this seems to be a clear wrongful conviction, even if she's guilty, because there's just so many problems here. Now, regarding all of this bizarre activity, we need some controls here. Does the average night in the neighborhood also involve reports of break-ins, vehicles cruising the area, and barefoot men just randomly walking around? I mean, is this normal for this particular neighborhood? Because supposedly this is a relatively upscale neighborhood. I mean, what is going on here? And why June 6th, 1996, next to Highway 66? Let's look at some more information here from this blog, Doubt in the Darlie Routier Case, The Subjective Science, September 2nd, 2012. The prosecution's case against Darlie Routier, presented in court in 1997, was based on circumstantial evidence. Lacking true and convincing physical evidence directly linking Darlie to the murders of her two sons, as well as the attack inflicted on herself, the prosecution focused on an approach to crime scene analysis that the National Academy of Sciences has stated is, quote, more subjective than scientific, end quote. And there actually is a link here to the National Academy of Sciences, Strengthening the Forensic Science in the U.S., A Path Forward, published 2009, right on the National Academy's website, nap.nationalacademies.org. Wow. So this is an official source here. Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine source here. Wow. That is interesting. I mean, there were a lot of people commenting on episode 1 on how this was just a slam dunk, easy case, no reason to go into it. But yet we have here the National Academy of Sciences stating that the crime scene analysis here was, quote, more subjective than scientific, end quote. So how is anybody to hallucinate that this was proven beyond a reasonable doubt? when it's all subjective, changing stories of police, non-followed up leads. I mean, there is so much shady business here that even if she's guilty, this is a clear wrongful conviction. So that approach is known as bloodstain pattern analysis. In 2010, the Texas Observer pointed out that 3 confirmed wrongful convictions had resulted from flawed blood spatter analysis. These are some well-researched articles here. Texas Observer, August 19th, 2010, A Bloody Injustice by Dave Mann, referencing all of these cases here. Very easy to verify. This says nothing about how many wrongful convictions have taken place as a result of subjective bloodstain pattern analysis that have not yet been confirmed or have not received the kind of attention that some cases do. That's an excellent point. A lot of goofs hallucinate that juries almost never get it wrong or never get it wrong, and that the only wrongful convictions are the ones that people find out about. I mean, this is just weird goofery and hallucinations. I mean, it's just insane. I mean, obviously, it's an unknown quantity of innocent people in prison. Along with the above information, the Observer published a detailed account of the conviction of Warren Horonek. Horonek was a less than sympathetic individual who was indicted by a grand jury on suspicion he murdered his wife, Bonnie. He claimed his wife committed suicide in the family home March 14, 1995, after the two had become severely intoxicated during an earlier night out. An investigation into the alleged suicide resulted in a shared conclusion on the part of the police sergeant responsible for supervising the investigation, the medical examiner who performed the autopsy, the crime scene investigator, and the local DA. Horonek's wife committed suicide using a firearm. Fort Worth DA Mike Parrish declined to bring charges against Horonek. He later told the media, "I always thought it was a suicide, still do." Bonnie's parents did not accept their daughter had taken their own life. Despite a history of depression in the past, they did not believe she was distraught enough during the time period surrounding her death to do something that extreme. Moreover, Horonek has a history of both being obnoxious and sometimes violent when he had too much to drink. When the DA refused to bring charges against Horonek, Bonnie's parents hired a lawyer who found a way to pursue charges without the assistance of the DA. Texas law allows any individual to bring evidence in front of a grand jury to seek an indictment. It is a well-known fact that when a grand jury is presented with evidence, it is easy to get an indictment. This case was no exception. However, the DA continued to refuse to prosecute Horonek. He claimed he had an ethical duty to refrain from charging a person with a crime when he believed that person was innocent. As a result, the DA's office in Tarrant County assigned 2 attorneys working in private practice to fill in as special prosecutors. These attorneys had access to resources the DA's office would not otherwise have had. Everything was backwards at Horonek's trial. The people who ordinarily testify on behalf of the prosecution testified on behalf of Horonek's defense. This included, but was not limited to, the sergeant in charge of the investigation, the DA who refused to seek charges in the first place, and the crime scene investigator. It was a situation that should only exist within an episode of The Twilight Zone. For the majority of Horonek's trial, it appeared that he would be acquitted, even though the foreman of the jury would later reveal that an acquittal was imminent. That is, until Tom Bevel took the stand. Before Bevel ever testified at Darlie Routier's trial, he testified at what may only be described as the bizarre trial of Warren Horonek. Though bloodstain pattern analysis has been used since the late 1800s, it was and still is rarely used as the primary evidence against a defendant. It is often used to strengthen a case that is already based on physical evidence, such as DNA or fingerprints. In 96, when Bevel took the stand to testify that Horonek murdered his wife and that this contention could be confirmed through bloodstain pattern analysis, the National Academy of Sciences was 13 years away from publishing a report that outlined the serious limitations of using this approach to crime scene analysis. The jurors who listened to Bevel found his testimony credible and convincing. Bevel stated that the tiny bloodstains on the shirt Horonek was wearing on the evening of his wife's death could only have resulted from a high-velocity occurrence. He claimed that the cause of the bloodstains was Horonek's use of a gun. He argued that Horonek's repeated attempts to administer CPR were not the cause. The jury subsequently changed their mind about Horonek's innocence and convicted him of murdering his wife. They did this based on Tom Bevel's testimony. The Observer wrote, quote, "Most criminal justice experts believe that flawed forensic evidence, the overreaching expert witnesses, have sent thousands of Americans to prison for crimes that they didn't commit, end quote. I mean, how staggering and mind-shocking is this? They're claiming thousands. Now, even if it's not thousands, even if it's only hundreds, I mean, that's still insane. And the gullible goofs, the coincidence there's the authority-worshipping cultists who are too utterly clueless to understand that different experts might have different opinions and that expert testimony is not the same thing as hard physical evidence. I mean, these goofs that just get triggered at any notion that someone convicted could be innocent. I mean, it's just insane. You see them all over true crime podcasts all over the place. The article went on to state that a number of commonly used sciences presented in U.S. courtrooms, including bloodstain pattern analysis and arson investigations, are really just, quote, junk sciences, end quote. Jim Varnon was one of the officers who responded to the scene. He believes that Hornack was wrongfully convicted and has put together extensive evidence countering the bloodstain pattern analysis presented by Bevel. He has since been fighting to prove Hornack's innocence ever since. Hornack has since tried to appeal his conviction. In late 2011, the Observer provided an update on his case, explaining that there were 2 hearings in 2011 that occurred in reference to his case. 3 forensic experts testified that overwhelming evidence points to a suicide. Yeah, it's weird. You have just a mountain of evidence and countless experts testifying that he's innocent, and only 1 was required to convict him. However, despite this and the fact that Bevel has been involved in other suspected wrongful convictions, including one in which a convicted man was later exonerated, Hornack remains in prison Texas. So not only is this based on Bevel, but it's based on a guy who's been involved in possibly many different wrongful convictions, at least one of which was a definitive exoneration. So clearly this guy's not trustworthy. There are similarities in the case of Warren Hornack and Darlie Routier. Both cases were based on circumstantial evidence. Both prosecutors presented Tom Bevel's in quotations, expert testimony regarding bloodstain analysis. Both crime scenes contained evidence that supported the convicted person's version of the events. Claims that Bevel used a science that has substantial limitations to discredit. The very group that claims Tom Bevel as a charter member, known as the Scientific Working Group on Bloodstain Pattern Analysis, SWGSTAIN, quote, recognizes that the opinions of bloodstain pattern analysts may contain an element of subjectivity, end quote. So this is just openly admitted basically by all parties that it's subjective. So how is this beyond a reasonable doubt if it's subjective? And different people can interpret it in different ways. I mean, this is not beyond a reasonable doubt by any stretch of the imagination. Continuing the article here, really, question mark, in light of this information, one has to ask just how reliable a conviction is when the weight of the prosecution's case rests on this type of science, in quotation science. One also has to wonder just how many people convicted based on this science are truly innocent. In the next article, I would describe the case in which Bevel's testimony helped to send a juvenile to prison for life without the possibility of parole. This same teenager grew into a man behind bars, but was exonerated based on an advanced approach to DNA testing. I mean, unfortunately, there's no shortage of these cases, and we only even hear about the ones that are found out about. So, it's even scary to think about. Obviously, the gullible goofs, the coincidence theorists, the authority-worshipping cultists that think there really aren't any innocent people in prison, and they hallucinate to know this for sure. They're just too mentally weak to fathom that there might be more than 1 or 2 innocent people in prison. There might be hundreds or even thousands. And that's a scary thought because in their cult of authority worship, they're too mentally weak to consider that, experts don't always get it right. The justice system doesn't always get it right. They don't want to live in that kind of world. So their mental weakness renders them unable to actually think logically or critically. Continuing here, September 9, 2012, Subjective Science, Part 2. 2 years after providing testimony on behalf of the prosecution at Darlie Routier's 97 trial, bloodstain pattern analyst Tom Bevel was involved in a case where the accused was arrested, convicted, denied multiple appeals, and then granted a retrial that resulted in his release from prison 3 decades after the original crime occurred. And again, if you go back to episode 1 in this Darlie Routier case, there's a number of clueless goofs in the comment section hallucinating that because that somehow denied appeals means that it was a slam dunk and there's nothing to talk about. These goofs just hallucinate that appeals would never be denied if there was legitimate evidence. Tons of wrongful convictions eventually overturned. There were many, many denied appeals throughout the entire process. This isn't rocket science, but for whatever reason, these goofs just have a really hard time with basic logic and reason. The man's name is Tim Masters, and he was only 15 years old when 37-year-old Peggy Hetrick was murdered in Fort Collins, Colorado. In February 87, Peggy ended her shift at work at 9 p.m. at a local clothing store. She had acquired a temporary roommate, and she had given her the only key she had. Her roommate had gotten drunk and passed out, oblivious to Peggy's banging on the door. Upon realizing she was locked out of her residence, Peggy went to a couple of bars and then returned home to get her key from the roommate. She changed her clothes and then returned to one of the bars just before midnight. Peggy did not have a vehicle, and so she relied on walking or obtaining rides from others. At the time of Peggy's murder, she was seeing a man named Matt Zollner. On the evening in question, Peggy and Zollner had an argument when she spotted him at the Prime Minister pub with another woman. She became extremely upset and left. This was the last time anyone reported seeing Peggy alive before her partially nude body was discovered the following morning by a person riding a bike. She was found near a curb that led into a field with her breasts exposed, her jeans and panties pulled down to her knees, and the straps of her purse still twisted around her arm. She had been stabbed and mutilated. The investigation. At the time Peggy was found in the field, 15-year-old Tim lived with his father in a trailer. The residence sat atop a hill that overlooked the field. During a routine canvassing of the surrounding area, Detective Linda Wheeler Holloway was informed by Tim's father that he had observed his son go toward the area where Peggy's body was found as he was walking to school that morning. The detective had Tim pulled out of class and learned that he indeed had seen the woman's body, but did not think it was a real person. He thought it resembled the dolls his school used to teach CPR courses. During Tim's bus ride to school, he told the detective he started to wonder if he had seen a body instead of a doll. And obviously that's very, very traumatic for a teenager or for anybody to see that. So many people would probably want to believe it's a doll and not a real body. The following day, 2 detectives showed up at Tim's home while he was in school. One of the detectives was Jim Broderick. They asked Tim's father to sign a consent to allow them to search the property. Believing that neither he nor his son had anything to hide, Clyde signed the form and allowed the detectives to conduct the search. The detectives found a number of knives in Tim's bedroom. The detectives also found notebooks containing stories and drawings that Broderick described in a report as dealing, quote, with death and dismemberment of body parts and other graphic portrayals of people being killed and the narratives that describe it, end quote. And you know what's weird, though? I mean, how many millions or hundreds of thousands of teenagers could you also find in their notebooks? Tim was a withdrawn teenager who used his narratives and drawings as a means of escaping. He was small, shy, and struggling with school. I mean, pretty much, again, when I was in school, any horror fans, any fans of horror movies or just the horror genre in general, whether it was novels or comic books, they all had these drawings and stories of death and mutilation and destruction, and what, 99.99999% of them weren't even involved in a single fight or a single unlawful incident of any kind, let alone murder. He was small, shy, and struggling with school. Although he was not violent, he enjoyed creating pictures that focused on themes such as monsters and war. He had an interest in the armed forces and liked to read about those kinds of topics. Ordinarily, a murder investigation begins with those closest to the victim and then spans outwards. This was not exactly what detectives did while investigating Peggy's murder. The police learned about her somewhat tumultuous relationship with Matt Zollner early on. Zollner told police that he had run into Peggy at the Prime Minister and offered her a ride home. He had been waiting for another woman at the time. He claimed to have offered Peggy a ride home, but when he returned from using the restroom, she was gone. Detectives were less concerned with Zollner and much more interested in Tim. They questioned him at length, insisting he committed the murder. See, this is why cops get such a bad name. I mean, when these scumbags bully teenagers, not to find the truth, but blaming them before any investigation is even done. This is just plain old, this is just plain old coercion, which of course, now back in the 90s, a lot of the gullible goof, authority-worshipping cultist bootleggers, they thought that coerced confessions and wrongful confessions, they weren't a thing. They didn't think cops would ever bully teens or young adults or even middle-aged people, just badgering them for countless hours into confessing murders they never committed. They didn't think that was a thing. Now, obviously, it's coming out more and more that this is just done so much more than people thought. It's just unconscionable, of course. Tim repeatedly informed the detectives that he was not involved. His father had signed a form that allowed police to interrogate his son for 9 hours. I mean, this is just insanity. See, this is why, I mean, regardless of what the parents want, I mean, minors should still always obviously have an attorney present for all questioning. Because again, it's not that some people think it makes you look guilty when you lawyer up, but just the amount of corruption, incompetence, and just unconscionable immorality that police engage in. I mean, getting a lawyer, that should just be step one no matter what, because you never know what kind of cops you're dealing with. I mean, because if they're good cops, they won't care if you get a lawyer anyway, because they're after the truth and they're going to follow the law. Only corrupt or unlawful cops, criminal cops, they might care because they're trying to just close the case regardless of the truth. Tim adamantly maintained his innocence despite the use of a wide range of tactics used by the officers attempting to extract a confession. The police had no physical evidence linking Tim to Peggy's murder. They did not have a confession or even an eyewitness claiming he was involved. All the police had were the drawings and writings of a sullen teenager who was trying to find his place in what he probably perceived as an unwelcoming environment. A year after the murder, a large team of police officers participated in a stakeout of his residence. They even went so far as to follow him incessantly and plant a false story in the news suggesting an arrest of a suspect was imminent. The police left copies of the story in places where Tim was sure to see them. Man, Tim really needs to sue all these cops for harassment and all this. I mean, this is insane. Police in Fort Collins were unable to make a convincing case against Tim with the evidence they had. As a result, Tim went on to graduate from high school and join the Navy. As Tim attempted to go on with his life, one of the detectives originally involved with investigating Peggy's murder made the decision to reopen the case. Detective Wheeler Holloway zeroed in on Tim once again in 1992 based on supposed new evidence involving something Tim had told a friend at his high school. When questioned about it, Tim told the police that he got the information from a classmate who had been involved in the police effort to search the field. Tim's claims were verified. The detectives did not pursue charges as a result. However, by 95, Jim Broderick had been promoted to the position of supervisor. He was in charge of the Crimes Against Persons unit at the local police department. He made the decision to refocus his efforts on the seemingly cold case involving Peggy Hetrick. Broderick still insisted Tim Masters committed the murder. One of the detectives on Broderick's squad, Troy Krenning, did not share his supervisor's belief that Tim committed the murder. Krenning felt that the elements of the murder appeared to be too well executed for a skinny and unsophisticated 15-year-old boy. Broderick eventually hired a forensic pathologist, Reed Melloy, at the rate of $300 per hour to analyze Tim's writings and drawings. Melloy eventually earned more than $42,000. The psychologist indicated that Tim had murdered Peggy Hetrick as a means of committing a displaced matricide, the murder of one's mother or mother figure. See, this is why a lot of people think that most psychologists are just clueless quacks. Because, I mean, they can make anything out of anything. I mean, this is just insane. So Broderick hired this forensic psychologist. Is this with taxpayer money that added up to $42,000? Or was this out of his own pocket? DA Terry Gilmore was not as confident about the strength of the alleged evidence against Tim. However, Broderick took special care to convince him and Assistant DA Jolene Blair that they were on the right path. On August 10th of 98, Tim was arrested for Peggy's murder. Tim had been living in California. Following an honorable discharge from the Navy, he lived an ordinary life working as an aircraft mechanic. Enter Tom Bevel. The DA did not have physical evidence to present at Tim's 99 trial. It wasn't that physical evidence did not exist in the case, it was that the physical evidence in the case did not match the accused. An important element of the case against Tim was convicting a jury that the murder happened in the general area where Peggy's body was found. After all, Tim had been a thin 15-year-old teenager when the murder occurred. The prosecution called Tom Bevel to provide expert testimony. Bevel informed the jury that he believed Peggy was murdered on Landings Drive and then either dragged or carried to the location where she was found the following morning. The testimony was critical in securing a conviction against him. If the jury had been presented with evidence that Peggy had been murdered somewhere else and then later dumped in the field, it would have been much harder to make the argument a 15-year-old boy who still rode the bus to school committed the crime. Tim was convicted of Peggy's murder and sent to prison. Bevel would later claim that he provided the testimony he did because he was not shown all of the necessary documentation and photographs to make a correct assessment of the crime scene. So then why the hell is he testifying if he doesn't have enough information? In 2005, Barry Goetz, who headed the crime lab at the Colorado Bureau of Investigation, contacted Bevel. He showed him reports and photographs that Bevel claimed he had never seen before. So maybe he did. We got to take his word for it. Bevel made the decision to write a report for Tim's defense, stating that he had serious concerns about the evidence or lack of it he received prior to giving testimony. Oh, wait, maybe this guy does have integrity. So, wow, okay. But he would later claim this. So Barry Goetz contacted Bevel and showed him this. After seeing it, Bevel made the decision to write a report for Tim's defense. So this might just be a clear incompetent, not necessarily somebody with malice, but just an incompetent who does try to do the right thing. But I mean, how many wrongful convictions has this guy testified for? After reviewing the information Goetz provided to him, Bevel reversed his original claim that Peggy had been murdered and mutilated in the field. He said, quote, "I do not believe all of that did take place at that juncture," end quote. CNN reported in 2008 that Bevel claimed, quote, "He has never experienced a miscommunication of this level in more than 35 years of testifying as an expert and as an Oklahoma City police officer, but he was reluctant to say police deceived him," end quote. Wow. Wow, the blue wall. Man, so clearly he doesn't have that much integrity. But in all honesty, how could he even be sure he has never experienced another miscommunication of this level? That's a good point. Bevel's claim to not have received all the pertinent information relating to the case was a problem experienced by Tim's defense as well. This poses even bigger questions about other convictions Bevel has helped prosecutors achieve. How many other cases did Bevel, or any other bloodstain pattern analyst for that matter, work on where important evidence in the form of reports and photographs were suppressed by the prosecution or investigators? And what reports and photographs was Bevel missing? Was it not apparent to him that he had not received a complete record as it pertained to the case? Did he at any time have any concerns about the information provided to him? Those are questions I can't find answers to. I do know that the alleged science known as bloodstain pattern analysis seems to rely entirely on the honesty and accuracy of the police investigation. It also relies on the credibility and integrity of the prosecutors as well. If the police and prosecutors only provide limited information to the experts they ask to testify, is it really that surprising that people are wrongfully convicted? Another disturbing aspect of wrongful convictions is that they ensure those who perpetrated the crimes are free to commit future ones. I mean, this is why all these corrupt and or incompetent cops, they need to be held accountable, and prosecutors. Because not only how many innocent people have they sent to prison, but how many guilty parties have they allowed to go on to commit more crimes against innocent people? That's all blood on their hands. The DNA evidence. In 2007, Tim's defense conducted testing of the clothing found on Peggy Hetrick. The testing revolved around an innovative and advanced approach to DNA testing, simply known as tough DNA. Selma and Richard Eikelamboom, forensic scientists in the Netherlands, were approached by Tim's defense and asked to create a DNA profile based on skin cells left on Peggy's clothing. The couple was successful in obtaining a full DNA profile of a male. Skin cells removed from the cuffs of Peggy's blouse suggested she may have been carried or dragged by the wrists. The same DNA profile was found on the lining of Peggy's underwear, which had been pulled down to her knees. The DNA did not match Tim Masters, however. Instead, it matched, get ready for a shocker, Matt Zollner, the boyfriend Peggy had encountered at the Prime Minister the night she was murdered. Is anybody shocked by that? Of course, DNA statistics, anytime a female is met with foul play, it's usually the boyfriend or ex-boyfriend or someone known to her. Not some random 15-year-old high schooler. Not that it couldn't be him, but again, that's why you do honest investigation into all parties instead of zeroing in on some high school kid. His release. In 2008, Tim's sentence was finally overturned. A judge threw out the original conviction based on the evidence that was presented in support of his innocence. He was subsequently released from prison. Following his release from prison, Tim Masters brought a civil lawsuit against the city of Fort Collins. He reportedly received $10 million as a result of the settlement. He should have personally sued all these incompetent and corrupt police that tried to put him away as well, not just the city. These days, Tim spends, because if officers knew that if they're corrupt scumbags, that they're going to be personally held liable, pensions suspended, etc., they might think twice about committing all this corruption. These days, Tim spends time doing things he enjoys, such as working on cars. He wrote and published a book called Drawn to Injustice: The Wrongful Conviction of Timothy Masters, with co-author Steve Leto. The book details his case and the barriers Tim faced in finally obtaining a new trial. He has also spoken out about his conviction. In 2011, Tim joined a panel of speakers at the Colorado University Law School to discuss being incarcerated, his wrongful conviction, and the challenges people face when it becomes necessary to prove innocence. I decided to write about Tim's case for 3 reasons. First, his conviction was achieved through the presentation of a highly circumstantial case. The police made a rush to judgment and refused to consider other possibilities. These same behaviors have contributed to other wrongful convictions and have also played a role in suspected wrongful convictions. Second, Tim was convicted based on expert testimony provided by Tom Bevel. Bevel's name comes up in relation to a number of confirmed and suspected wrongful convictions. This same expert was responsible for helping police and prosecutors obtain a conviction in Darlie's case as well. Not only has the science Bevel relied on come under fire in recent years, but cases like Tim's raise questions about the communication process that occurs between these experts and prosecutors. Finally, Tim's case is an example of how dangerous circumstantial evidence is in a murder case. Had police and prosecutors followed the physical evidence in this situation, even if it meant waiting for years until the technology became available to analyze it properly, they could have saved the city a lot of time and money. They might have apprehended the real killer. Most importantly, they might have given those who cared about Peggy a true sense of justice. But obviously, unfortunately, many police departments are more interested in closing cases instead of getting the right guy. There's an interesting comment on this article by Razum. I would like to add that Tim was recently finally officially exonerated. This is quite unusual, and he had to wait 3 years after his release. I mean, this is just insane. I mean, some of these corrupt courts and corrupt systems, even when it's definitively proven it wasn't him, he still has to wait years for the official exoneration. I mean, that's insane. Also, as far as a misuse of science and circumstantial evidence, there is the Lucretia Murray case, an 11-year-old girl convicted twice of killing a toddler and sentenced to 25 years. The bogus expert testimony as well as sloppy forensic science during the second trial caused serious criticism, but in the end, it was true scientific endeavor that cleared her and prevented a third trial. Note that once the powers that be make a child the target of a politically motivated public outrage, usually nothing short of proving the child's innocence will stop the state prosecution, or shall we say persecution. Children in such situations become guilty until proven innocent, especially when local media initially participate in and profit from the demonization of the child, as the Austin American-Statesman did in this case. The New York Times' Bob Herbert wrote eloquently on the case, among others. Lucretia spent 3 years in prison among mostly much older inmates, then several years under home arrest and similar restrictions before she was cleared. And hopefully she got a large settlement as well from these scumbags. I mean, if you have 100% definitive evidence, then yes, then you go after the guilty parties, whether they're teenagers or whoever. But I mean, this level of insanity when there's no real evidence and they have to make it up, or they don't like the writings of a high schooler. I mean, this is just insanity. So Tom Bevel, clearly a very dubious track record, yet a lot of goofs, just put so much blind faith in this guy's testimony. It's really weird. And a silly string video. I mean, this is not justice no matter how you look at it. If that's the best you got, it's a wrongful conviction, even if she's guilty. Beyond a reasonable doubt is a very, very clear standard. Okay, so I'm going to go over one more article here, try to tie this all together. This is on Darlie Routier Unsolved.wordpress.com, June 24th, 2018. The Intruder, a serial offender. The case of Darlie Routier is probably the most tragic example of how the state of Texas made the word justice something to be feared rather than something embraced. The young mother of 3 boys was convicted of killing 2 of them on June 6, 1996 by stabbing them to death, probably one of the most terrible crimes a mother could be accused of committing. It may have seemed like an open and shut case. The forensic evidence was compelling. However, it wasn't long before inconsistencies, flawed evidence, and the manipulation of the truth by prosecutors came to light. It is not my intention to cover the disgraceful actions of the prosecution in manufacturing a false case against Darlie Routier. That has been covered in depth by other writers. The version of events by the defense was that an intruder was responsible for the violent and shocking attack on the Routier home, and there is more than sufficient evidence to support that. Of course, the main priority of Darlie's supporters and defense team is to gain her freedom as soon as possible. So attention to theories of who could have been responsible for the attack takes second place to challenging the many flaws that led to her conviction, and rightly so. Even so, who launched the attack on Routier's home is something of interest to me because I think there are important pointers in the evidence to the type of criminal who may have been responsible for the shocking crime. The first problem is that the Rowlett Police Department did not investigate whether someone other than Darlie Routier was responsible for the crime, even though there was evidence to support this. The crime happened at around 2:20 in the morning, and by 6 o'clock, based on the theory of one man, the perpetrator, as far as the police were concerned, was Darlie Routier. In any investigation, it is essential that all possible avenues are thoroughly investigated as a process of elimination to ensure, as far as possible, that the police are investigating the guilty party and not an innocent. This was not done, so any other evidence that could have been available to them or collected concerning an intruder was not discovered. Or was it and suppressed? Nonetheless, there is evidence that does indicate an intruder was responsible. The likelihood is that there would be no other immediately identifiable suspects because the Routiers had no known enemies, or anyone who would want to do them harm. I would propose that the attack on the Routiers was conducted by a stranger, and there are key parts of the evidence that would indicate such a stranger would be a particular type of criminal. Of course, this is my theory based on my experience and knowledge. It may be right, it may not be. I will leave that for the reader to decide. But every time I have analyzed this case over the past 6 years, I keep coming back to the same place. The crime was committed by a serial offender, most probably a serial killer. There are no other motives that we know of, such as robbery, revenge, and so on. Serial offenders, such as serial killers, are fairly straightforward in the way they commit their crimes. Each has their own driving force, the reason they feel compelled to commit the crimes they do. Each has their own ritualistic behavior they feel compelled to go through in order to gain this level of satisfaction they desire from their actions. There are many common behavioral patterns that can be identified across different perpetrators of serial crime. Although taken individually, there is nothing to indicate any involvement of a serial offender. When we look at some of the key pieces of evidence in this case together, we can see a pattern emerging that indicates a serial offender is a high possibility as a suspect in this crime. Why Darlie? This is something we can have no answer for unless we have the perpetrator. There could be hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of reasons why someone is attractive to a serial killer. The only other way we could have some idea is if we have information on similar offenses that seem to be related. Other than that, we cannot know. Stranger in the area. The first piece of evidence that we consider is that a stranger or strangers were seen by several witnesses in the area prior to the crime. Reports of a black car parked with occupants who appear to remain in the car for long periods of time without doing anything were reported. This car was seen at various locations where there was a clear view of the Routier home. Although there is some variation between accounts, the fact remains that there was a black car with tinted windows that was out of place, and there was an occupant who stayed in the car. There is no known reason for this car to be in the area or to be parked in a position in which witnesses observed it. It is a residential area with no commercial or municipal facilities that someone could be visiting or want to use. Vehicles or people in the area are going to be involved in a limited range of activities. Either they live in the area, are visiting one of the residences, or providing services to the area, or are conducting work on local infrastructure. The occupant or occupants of the black car sightings were doing none of these. Through witness statements, we know that the car arrived, stayed for a while, and then left with no other known activity related to the car or its occupants. This is a hallmark of someone conducting surveillance. On the night of the incident, a neighbor opposite the Routier home reported that they saw a small black car parked in front of their mailbox at around 2 a.m. When the neighbor was alerted by the commotion outside after the attack, the black car had gone. This was before they heard sirens of emergency vehicles getting close. The vast majority of serial killings are the result of planned courses of action by the perpetrator. Part of the ritualistic nature of the majority of serial killings is planning the crime so that the killer gains the maximum advantage over their victims to gain the maximum pleasure or benefit the offender desires. Targets are selected depending on the particular driving forces of the perpetrator, who will then observe the target to ascertain the best opportunity or circumstances under which the killer may be able to commit the crime. Serial killers like predictability. They want to follow the path of least resistance with the maximum chances of success of achieving their objective. They don't want unnecessary interference, and they want the lowest chance of being discovered or caught. In such an area such as Eagle Drive, there is nowhere secluded where an individual could park for an extended period of time and not be noticed. The times the car was observed tended to be at times when there wouldn't be much activity in the area, for example, early to mid-afternoon. It is highly likely that the car and driver were in the area at other times, perhaps in the late evening or early hours of the morning when no one saw them. The car and driver may have driven along Eagle Drive at other times and may have been seen by other residents who do not remember what would seem a normal event. Darren's Jaguar. During the normal day-to-day routine of the family, Darren usually parked his car in the driveway because the car would not fit in the garage. But 2 days before the incident at the Routier home, the car had been transported to a garage for repairs. I mean, is that coincidental too? I mean, 2 days before the killings? I mean, I don't know. If someone were watching the Routier home, it would be easy to presume that the absence of the Jaguar also meant that Darren was not at home. That's a good point there. If it was absent for a second day, this could be perceived as Darren being away for an extended period rather than just the time the garage was under observation on previous occasions. To a person planning an attack on the home, this would mean that one problem or encumbrance to their objective was now absent, and that it could be a favorable time to strike now that there was a lone female and 3 very young children in the property with no protection. As I mentioned earlier, serial killers are not interested in engaging in unnecessary confrontation. They will strike at a time that gives them the best chance of achieving their objective by following a path of least resistance. The time of the attack is significant. The attack occurred just after 2 in the morning. The quietest time in most residential areas around the world is between 2 and 4 a.m. That is the time when most people are asleep and there is the least activity on the streets. This is the time of night when human circadian rhythm induces the strongest sleep drive. This time frame provides the best opportunity for someone committing violent serial crime to be successful in their objective. There is less likelihood of people in the vicinity being aware of the criminal because they are likely to be in the deeper stages of sleep, and it is also the time when the intended victim is likely to be more docile and pose less resistance to the criminal. Again, the serial killer wants the path of least resistance. At this time of night, any potential human threat to this type of violent criminal is likely to be easier to subdue during the hours when humans are more alert. There have been many cases where a deadly attack has been placed against one person and other people in the same residence and sometimes in the same bed have been unaware until much later on at a time when their natural impulse to sleep becomes less. At 2 a.m., it is also reasonable to assume that the majority of people will be where they normally sleep at night, which is usually in their bedroom. In the case of the Routiers, it was normal for the boys to sleep in their room and Darlie and Darren, together with baby Drake, to sleep in their bedroom. A person observing the property may have noticed a pattern of lights being turned on and off that indicated this was the normal routine. We know that Darlie slept downstairs off and on because she was sensitive to baby Drake's movements that would disturb her sleep or keep her from settling. It could be that an offender may have noticed this pattern of behavior if there were external signs of lights being used room to room. Either way, an observer could gain a good understanding of the family's routine over a period of time. The kitchen knife. We know that the horrific violence that occurred in the Routier's home that night was inflicted using a knife from the knife block on the Routier's kitchen. This would indicate that the intruder did not go to the Routier's home equipped with a substantial weapon such as a large knife or firearm ready for a bloody confrontation to inflict bodily injuries on a victim or to inflict immediately fatal injuries. This is not unusual in serial killings, in particular for the worst category of serial killer, the sexual sadist. They often have their own elaborate ritualistic methods for conducting their crimes, and these often include using methods of killing which would enable them to experience gratification for as long as possible. Some common methods among this group include using the victim's personal belongings, such as clothing, in particular underwear, used to strangle or suffocate the victim, or items from the victim's home which can be used in a similar way so the criminal can experience the gradual draining of the victim's life. The use of the knife appears to have been a spontaneous response to the situation the perpetrator found inside the Routier's home, a situation they did not expect. The attacker was met with a scenario they had not planned for or expected. Damon, Devon, and Darlie were in the lounge area and not in their respective bedrooms as the attacker expected at that time of night or morning. Damon and Devon were not the intended targets. They were barriers to the perpetrator achieving their objective. The perpetrator would have become frustrated and angry at having their plans disrupted and would seek to rectify the situation as quickly as possible so they could continue. Hence, the perpetrator using a convenient weapon, the kitchen knife, and using it with extreme force. The fact that Damon received significantly more but less penetrating injuries than his brother could indicate that he woke or partially woke when the perpetrator entered the area. The perpetrator would then have had to act swiftly to ensure the child would not do anything that would alert anyone else. Therefore, the stabbings occurred in quick succession with less power than those his brother suffered. Alternatively, because Damon was more separated from Devon and Darlie, he could have received the immediate violent response from the intruder as they vented some of their anger or frustration. With Damon dealt with, most likely the perpetrator believing he was dead, the perpetrator could then take relatively more time to remove Devon as to the barrier to the perpetrator's objective. With Devon being closer to Darlie, the perpetrator could take a second to build up enough emotional force to silently stab the boy to such an extent that the knife wounds nearly penetrated the boy's body and were likely to be immediately fatal. Raise the knife, pause to generate maximum downward force, strike, retract, and repeat. It would have been decisive and silent blows that the perpetrator could almost guarantee would be effective. The perpetrator's attention then would turn to his intended victim, Darlie. It is unsurprising that Darlie was not subjected to this same very directed stabbing as the two boys. Stabbing Darlie was not the intention or part of the killer's ritual. In fact, slashing at Darlie may have occurred as it became clear to the killer that their plan was disrupted beyond recovery, turning their attention to ensuring there were no witnesses remaining at the scene. Being in a highly frustrated or disappointed state, the perpetrator would have attempted to leave the scene as soon as possible and not waste valuable time or resources engaging in unproductive, as they would see it, violence. A serial killer would much rather escape the scene and choose another time and place with more chances of success than take unnecessary risks when the situation doesn't go to plan or serve the killer's ritualistic needs from the experience. Darlie's panties went missing. Later on, Darlie realized her panties were missing. She had them on when she lay on the sofa before she fell asleep. This fits with the ritualistic methods of the majority of serial killers. The taking of trophies that are items of a very personal nature to the victim. These trophies can be clothing, and particularly underwear, jewelry, or even parts of the victim's body, such as hair or skin. The perpetrator keeps these items as a reminder of the feelings they experienced as they were committing the crime, allowing them to relive the experience to some extent. It is common in sleeping rape cases for the underwear of the victim to be removed before they are awake, or during the early stages of waking when they are most disoriented. A killer who is skilled in their ritual would have little problem removing panties from a victim while they were asleep. Escaping a crime scene with a trophy is the prime conclusion for many serial killers and other violent serial offenders. The perpetrator took the sock. Darlie Routier did not place the sock in the alley approximately 75 meters from the Routier home. Having aborted their crime, the only interest of the perpetrator was getting away as quietly and cleanly as possible. There was no reason to take the knife with them. It would have become yet another inconvenience in a disastrous attempt. On dropping the knife at the entrance to the utility area, the perpetrator picked up the sock, which was on their direct exit route as they left, and they used it to remove spots of blood either from their own skin or clothing. The amount of blood on the sock was very small compared to the amount of blood generated at the scene as the boys and Darlie bled out, and which covered Darlie's t-shirt and hands. This indicates that the sock was not used to clear a lot of the blood, and neither was it picked up by someone whose hands were covered in blood. The sock was disposed of approximately 75 meters from the Routier home in the alley at the back of the house. This was the route taken by the perpetrator. The location of the sock is also significant with regards to the perpetrator's actions after the crime. Although we have no further information because the police did not investigate this possibility, it does tell us something when we look at a map of the area. It tells us that the perpetrator chose to head southeast from the Routier residence using the convenience of the alley at the rear of the property. They chose not to go west along Eagle Drive, which they could have done, and which would have been far easier if they wanted to get into a vehicle quickly, but would have been much more complicated to escape the residential area. Heading southeast along the alley would give them easy access to a vehicle either parked further along the alley or on Eagle Drive, and consequently an easier and much faster escape from the residential area either by using Linda Vista Drive onto Dal Rock Road or driving to the end of Eagle Drive and turning onto Willowbrook Drive and onto Dal Rock Road. Dal Rock Road is a main road with easy access to a number of alternative routes out of the area. Being a main road, other traffic would have been using it throughout the night, enabling the perpetrator to blend in and escape unnoticed during the crucial minutes before the police would arrive at the crime scene. However, the most obvious route the perpetrator could have used to get to a vehicle does not account for the sighting of the little black car seen outside of the house of the neighbor directly opposite the Routier home. On exiting the Routier home, the perpetrator headed in a southeasterly direction using the alley at the back of the house. A much more logical, shorter, and easier route would have been to exit the Routier home directly onto Eagle Drive and go the short distance to the little black car. Two things that could have made the perpetrator take the longer route along the alley. They were in a panic and wanted to get away as soon as possible, not really thinking of the direction they were going in, but this hardly seems indicative of someone capable of the cold-blooded planning used in this incident. The alternative, and most likely, is that they attempted to take the shorter route, but something or someone spooked them, and they went in the opposite direction to circle around to the little black car. A route that was darker and where it could be easier for the perpetrator to conceal themselves using neighboring gardens and other cover. It would be easy for the perpetrator to cut between the houses, many of which had no dividing fences or barriers. If they were spooked, this would explain why the sock was discarded where it was and not closer to the Routier home. The perpetrator would need cover away from the streetlight and the floodlights of the Routier home that were reportedly lit. Then they could return to their car with the minimum chance of being noticed. The location of the sock is likely to be the point at which the perpetrator made their way back onto or across Eagle Drive in between the properties. It is the point where light from the street lamps, etc., would be the weakest. The perpetrator could have crossed Eagle Drive at that point and make their way behind the properties on the opposite side of the road to emerge closer to the car. The total time it would take to cover the alternative route, which is in the region of 150 meters, would be no more than around 30 seconds for someone in a rush, running or jogging at a normal pace for an adult, in the region of 11 miles an hour or around 5 meters per second. There are no witnesses that indicate anyone saw a little black car leaving the area. This is to be expected if people were aroused from sleep when the commotion started outside Eagle Drive. The car would have left within 35 to 40 seconds maximum, long before the commotion started. The police attending the incident made no report of passing or encountering a little black car on their way to the Routier home. This is hardly surprising because they were not looking for a vehicle at the time. They were concentrating on getting to the scene of a reported incident at a domestic dwelling. Murder in Texas. During 95 and going into early 96, the murder rate had dropped on previous years. However, there was a sharp increase of murders of people unknown to the perpetrator. In part, this was due to a trend where criminals would target strangers and their property for serious violent crime for no other reason than the violence itself. Texas is the second highest state after California for the number of known serial killings, which is probably related to its size. In the period 95 to 96, approximately 36% of murders remained unsolved in Texas, which is a significant number and could well include undetected serial murders. And also that's without factoring in the percentage of wrongful convictions that have yet to be discovered. Because if murders are technically solved, but it's the wrong person, they still use that in the percentage. Rowlett Police Department. As I mentioned earlier, I'm not going to address the case against Darlie as presented by the prosecution. Needless to say, the police department demonstrated incredible incompetence in the way they approached the investigation, and this is covered in depth by other resources and writers. Where it concerns this theory is that investigators effectively stopped investigating less than 4 hours after the crime occurred. Instead of investigating all leads and possibilities, they concentrated on one, that the crime was committed by Darlie. This seriously inhibits us in finding useful information that could be vital in establishing if this crime was part of a string of other offenses by the same perpetrator or not. For example, obviously Darlie was targeted for some reason, yet the police did not investigate if there were any events that could indicate Darlie or any of the family were the subject of a stranger's attention leading up to the crime. Neither did the police investigate if anyone could have held a significant grudge against any of the Routiers. If the police had taken the theory of an intruder committing the crime in a professional manner, they could have investigated vehicle movements throughout the analysis of public and private CCTV along the main routes. They could have conducted a campaign to try and establish the identity of an intruder by using the press and public appeals. The police could have investigated known offenders who matched the description given by Darlie and others through their databases and departments. It's not too late. Although many years have passed since the tragic events on Eagle Drive, there is always a chance that the perpetrator could still be caught or at least possible suspects revealed. The chances are that the offender has never been caught and may never have been implicated in any crime. Often, serial killers can operate for decades and never come under suspicion. When we think of serial killers, we envision that they go on some kind of rampage or are constantly indulging in their sick activities. But there are a high number of serial offenders who may go years or even decades between crimes. Finding potential suspects or crimes that could be linked to this case takes resources and dedication. It is highly unlikely that the police would even consider such an investigation when they think they already have the perpetrator behind bars. So we come to something of a dead end. Hypothetically, if an investigation were launched, there are several key things an investigator could look for. Similar crimes. A home invasion where a female was subjected to violence, probably including throttling or strangulation, or where the victims owned possessions such as clothing that were used against them. Crimes at a similar time of day where a female was subjected to an attack, most likely in their own home. Of particular interest would be where personal items have been taken or gone missing. Victims that bear similarities to Darlie, young women, perhaps blonde, who stand out in their community. Crime where the perpetrator resembles Darlie's description of the intruder and most likely involve extreme violence. Crimes where female victims have been abducted. Of course, this list is not exhaustive, and the flexibility in the types of crime and victims would be needed during the initial stages. Serial killers can operate over vast distances, but I would commence any inquiries limiting the search to the state of Texas. Being one of the biggest states, it is likely that the perpetrator has committed crimes within its borders. Defining a time frame to search is tricky. We know that serial killers can operate over many years and commit only a few known offenses. Initially, I would limit a search to a year before and a year after this incident and see what materializes from that, expanding the time frame as necessary. The important thing is that the time frame is thoroughly investigated. Conclusion. I am not claiming that this is what happened. I am claiming that it is a real possibility considering the facts and evidence of the case as they are known. And this should have been investigated by police at the time. It is a theory or framework from which more in-depth investigation and analysis could take place. There are a series of indicators or flags that fall into place in the correct order which indicate there is a high likelihood that this crime was committed by a very violent serial offender. The main flags are surveying or stalking the intended victim to analyze when the best opportunity to strike would be. In this case, the perception that Darlie was alone with the children because Darren's car had already been absent from its usual parking place at the home. Not taking a substantial weapon to commit the crime, preferring to use another method. Although we really don't know. They could have entered with their own weapon, but opted to use the kitchen knife instead. The taking of a trophy, Darlie's panties, showing no interest in stealing anything that was readily available. Not the objective, and the perpetrator is likely not to have means to readily dispose of valuable items through a fence. Leaving the scene before completion, but not ensuring all victims were dead. There was an interruption or resistance that was difficult to overcome, leading to frustration that the objective could not be completed. This crime was neither committed by Darlie Routier, nor was it a random attack. It was planned and executed as close to the plan as was possible. The important thing for a serial killer is the objective, often involving a ritual or series of events that need to be completed in order for the criminal to gain maximum satisfaction. If things don't go to plan, they become frustrated and would much rather get out of the situation as easily as possible than risk being exposed or caught, unless that is their objective, which is rare. Serial killers are not brave and will avoid anything they see as detrimental or non-productive. Killing the two boys was nothing more than a nuisance to the offender. When it became clear that their plan had gone seriously wrong, the offender tried to implement some sort of form of damage control and then escape. You may agree, you may not. Based on my experience and knowledge and having looked at the case of Darlie Routier in depth from different perspectives, I keep coming back to the same conclusion. This crime was committed by a serial offender of a particular nasty nature. By Martin Simmons, June 2018, on the Darlie Routier Unsolved.wordpress.com website. So what does everybody make of that? I mean, it's an interesting theory. I mean, there's some coincidences that are not explained, including the guys attempting to burglarize or enter a house in the area and sightings of other suspicious vehicles in the area. But here's my final point here with the McGuire theory. Again, I do not claim it is true. Untrue, I'm just throwing a theory out there. Is it possible that Darren did hire people to burglarize the house and that they were watching the house? They were in the black vehicle, but someone else entered the home and killed them. And so that these other criminals who never came forward, obviously, they just left. And it was possibly some other psychos that did this. Is that a possibility? I mean, I don't know. It's kind of weird. I mean, there's just so many weird people in the area and weird vehicles that have not been explained or investigated thoroughly. That's the takeaway here. So we really have no idea what happened. But there's an awful lot of weird activity in the area in the night in question, June 6th, 96, next to Highway 66, next to a cemetery. Make of that what you will. Leave your own thoughts, theories, suggestions, rebuttals, debunkings of any kind in the comment section as we continue to explore this very, very perplexing case. If Darlie is guilty, it seems that Darren would have to be involved. I mean, there has to be a high... It just seems very unlikely, based on all available information, that she could have pulled this off alone. But if Darren was somehow involved, that increases the possibility a lot. However, it's kind of weird to dismiss the fact that he's telling people to burglarize his home as part of an insurance scam. The countless sightings of a vehicle or multiple vehicles and strange people in the area before, during, and after the crime. I mean, that's kind of hard to write off. It's kind of coincidental for this particular area, unless there's tons of reports like these, and it has not, and that's just a baseline. But I'm not sure it is for this area. So I hope everybody found another edition of the Mindshock podcast interesting and informative. You can help support the podcast, donate to our PayPal. Just check the link in the description. You can also become a YouTube member right here on YouTube. Like and share Twitter, Facebook, Reddit, Patreon. This is Bruce McGuire signing off. Catch you guys next time.